Put the pen down, Marcus, I said, my voice barely above a whisper in the silent kitchen. If you sign that hardship declaration, you commit perjury on a federal document. He paused, the tip of his ballpoint pen hovering a millimeter over the paper, his jaw tightening as he looked up at me with cold, dismissive eyes. We don't have a choice, Sarah, he sneered. We are flat broke, and if I don't file this, we lose the house. He had no idea what I'd just done while he was taking his morning shower. But to understand this, you need to know how a marriage built on numbers can crumble under the weight of an invisible ledger. My name is Sarah, and for 12 years, I have worked as a senior compliance analyst for a regional commercial bank. My entire job revolves around tracking anomalies, finding the micro discrepancies in corporate filings, tracing wire paths through correspondent banks, and spotting the subtle patterns people leave behind when they try to hide reality. I am not a person who acts on emotion or intuition. I act on paper trails. When you train your brain to look at the world through audit trails, you realize that people rarely lie with complete perfection. They always leave a footprint. Marcus and I had been married for 8 years. He ran a boutique architectural consulting firm that specialized in mid-sized commercial developments. For the first 5 years, our life was comfortably predictable. We shared an unpretentious 3-bedroom ranch in suburban Ohio, drove modest sedans, and split our living expenses 50-50 through a joint checking account. Then, about 18 months ago, the narrative began to shift. It started with small conversations at the dinner table. Marcus would come home late, rubbing his temples, talking about canceled municipal contracts, supply chain spikes, and clients withholding retainers. Soon, those casual complaints turned into systemic austerity. He asked to pause our monthly contributions to our joint high-yield savings account. 3 months later, he asked me to cover the full mortgage payments, promising he'd make it up to me once his firm cleared a rough patch. Because I loved him, and because I understood that small businesses face cash flow volatility, I didn't question it. I stepped up. I took on extra freelance compliance audits on weekends to cover our household baseline, drawing down my personal savings to keep us afloat while Marcus painted a picture of impending ruin. By last autumn, the atmospheric pressure in our home had become suffocating. Marcus instituted what he called survival mode. He insisted we cut our internet bandwidth, cancel health insurance riders, and sell my mother's antique silver tea set just to meet our property tax obligations. Every time I brought up our financial statements, he would slide into a cold, defensive posture, accusing me of lacking faith in him during his lowest moment. "You think I want to live like this?" he'd say, waving a stack of overdue utility notices in my face. "I am drowning, Sarah. The firm is operating in the red, and if you press me on this, you're going to push me over the edge." He played the part of a defeated, desperate man with terrifying accuracy. But what he forgot was that a compliance analyst doesn't just listen to the story. Eventually, she verifies the ledger. The first crack in his narrative appeared on a Tuesday in mid-November. I was reviewing our joint tax return draft that our CPA had prepared. Attached to the back was a schedule of pass-through losses from Marcus's LLC, showing a net operating loss of $142,000 for the tax year. Attached to the schedule was an automated bank routing confirmation for a state tax refund offset. The routing number listed for the refund destination wasn't our joint account at Chase, nor was it Marcus's primary business operating account at Huntington. It was an institution I recognized instantly from my day job, First Caribbean International Bank in Georgetown, Cayman Islands. It was a tiny detail, a routing code that 99% of taxpayers would glaze over. But my eyes locked onto it. A domestic architectural firm headquartered in Columbus had no structural reason to hold an offshore account in the Caymans. I didn't scream. I didn't print the document out and wave it in his face over dinner. In my line of work, the moment you alert the target that an investigation has commenced, the evidence disappears into encrypted cloud servers and shell entities. Instead, I opened a private, encrypted spreadsheet on a dedicated burner laptop that never connected to our home Wi-Fi. Over the next 6 weeks, I conducted a silent, methodical audit of our entire marital ecosystem. Every evening, after Marcus went to sleep, I sat at the kitchen counter with a USB drive, cross-referencing our personal bank statements with public property registries, corporate state filings, and court dockets. I began pulling county recorder records for his firm's past projects. In March 2024, Marcus had liquidated a commercial parcel off Route 23 that we owned jointly under an entity named Crestview Holdings, LLC. He had presented me with a closing statement showing a net loss on the sale due to environmental remediation costs, handing me a check for $4,500 as my half of the residual equity. I requested the certified deed copy directly from the county recorder's vault. The actual purchase price recorded on the conveyance fee statement wasn't the $180,000 Marcus had claimed. It was $890,000. The buyer was a holding company registered in Delaware called Apex Vantage Properties, LLC. And when I tracked the registered agent of Apex Vantage through the Delaware Secretary of State database, the filing address resolved to a law firm in Miami specializing in international asset protection. Marcus hadn't sold the land at a loss to an outside developer. He had sold it to himself under a shell company, siphoning $705,000 in untaxed capital gains straight out of our marital estate and routing it through Florida into the Cayman Islands, while I was skipping personal grocery items to save. 40 a week, my husband was executing a slow, deliberate financial execution of our marriage. He was deliberately draining our liquid joint assets, inflating household debt on my personal credit lines, and crying poverty so that when he eventually filed for divorce, I would walk away with nothing, believing there was nothing to divide. The level of patience required to sit across the table from a man who is actively starving you out financially, while he eats dinner you paid for, is excruciating. But discipline is the analyst's greatest weapon. I needed absolute proof of where that money ended up. On December 12th, Marcus left his personal tablet on the nightstand while he went out for a 45-minute jog. He had disabled screen lock notifications, believing I was entirely tech-illiterate regarding mobile device forensics. I connected his tablet to my isolated network bridge and pulled his browser cache, cloud backups, and archived email threads. That was the night I found the blueprints. They weren't blueprints for a local commercial building. They were architectural renderings, structural engineering certificates, and title documents for a luxury cliffside villa in West Bay, Grand Cayman. The property was magnificent, a 4-bedroom, modern concrete structure featuring an infinity pool overlooking the ocean, private beach access, and a deep-water yacht slip. According to the Cayman Islands Land Registry record attached to the PDF, the property, registered under Villa Sereno Linad, had been purchased outright in August for $2.4 million. U.S. The sole beneficial owner of Villa Sereno Linad was Marcus Vance. I sat in the dark bedroom, staring at the high-resolution renders of the oceanfront paradise my husband had purchased with stolen marital funds while claiming we were 3 weeks away from foreclosure. Attached to the deed was a closing statement detailing wire transfers originating from 3 separate offshore accounts, aggregating millions in capital he had methodically funneled away over 4 years. The surface truth was agonizingly clear. Marcus was a sociopathic fraudster who was systematically bankrupting our domestic life to build a secret, lavish second life in the Caribbean, preparing to abandon me the moment the last dollar was secured. Most people, upon finding a $2.4 million secret offshore mansion, would immediately call a divorce attorney, file for emergency asset freezing, and confront their spouse in a rage. But as I scrolled down through the archived PDF folder containing the villa's property file, I noticed a subfolder labeled Legal Compliance and Escrow Correspondence. I opened it, expecting to find messages between Marcus and offshore wealth managers discussing tax evasion strategies. Instead, what I found inside changed everything. Inside the folder were hundreds of scanned pages of personal correspondence, medical transcripts, and binding legal trusts dating back 5 years. Marcus wasn't building a Playboy getaway to escape our marriage. The documents revealed that Marcus had a half-sister, Clara, who was 7 years younger than him. Clara suffered from a severe degenerative neurological condition requiring round-the-clock specialized care, experimental clinical therapies, and continuous long-term residential treatment, none of which was covered by insurance. 5 years ago, their father, a volatile, deeply abusive man, had passed away, leaving behind a tangled web of predatory business debts, personal guarantees, and an explicit legal directive that left Clara entirely without financial support or legal guardianship. Marcus had quietly taken on full legal and financial guardianship of Clara to protect her from being institutionalized in a substandard state facility. But the financial burden was catastrophic. Clara's specialized care costs exceeded $28,000 a month. When his firm hit genuine financial trouble during the pandemic, Marcus faced an impossible dilemma. If he disclosed Clara's existence and care costs to me, those liabilities would become part of our shared financial record. Furthermore, their father's former business creditors, who were actively pursuing clawback litigation against any asset connected to the family line, would have been able to place liens on any trust set up domestically for Clara's care to protect Clara from his father's creditors and ensure her lifelong care was completely insulated from legal seizure. Marcus had made a dark, desperate calculation. He decided to transfer funds into offshore trusts, purchase the Cayman property, which doubles as a licensed private residential care facility under local medical trust laws, and place the asset entirely out of reach of U.S. jurisdiction. He had chosen to destroy his own marriage, commit financial fraud against his wife, and endure my quiet resentment, rather than risk his vulnerable sister being stripped of her medical care by predatory creditors or court actions. He had made himself a monster in my eyes to play the savior in hers. The moral complexity of what I was looking at sat heavily in my chest. Marcus was not simply a greedy monster who wanted a tropical villa. He was a terrified brother who had used illegal, destructive methods to protect a defenseless family member. But in doing so, he had willingly sacrificed me. He had gaslit me, drained my personal life savings, subjected me to severe emotional distress, and treated my life as acceptable collateral damage for his family's salvation. He was both a protector and a betrayer. And that did not grant him a free pass to destroy my life. I spent 3 days contemplating my next move. I didn't want to destroy Clara. She was an innocent victim in this tragedy. But I also refused to allow Marcus to complete his legal execution of my financial future while playing a martyr in secret. Quietly, without informing Marcus, I hired a top-tier forensic accountant and a high-net-worth matrimonial attorney who specialized in cross-border asset recovery. I presented them with my complete, pristine digital evidence binder. We didn't file a public lawsuit immediately. Instead, my attorney drafted a private, confidential restructuring and settlement agreement, which brings us back to that quiet morning in the kitchen, with Marcus holding his ballpoint pen over the false financial hardship declaration. "Put the pen down, Marcus," I repeated calmly, setting my laptop on the kitchen island facing him. He glared at me, his face red with frustration. "Sarah, I don't have time for your interrogation today. I'm trying to save this family." I didn't argue. I simply tapped the spacebar on the laptop. The screen illuminated with high-resolution photos of Villa Sereno, followed by the Cayman Islands trust deeds bearing his signature, and finally, the complete ledger showing the $705,000 diverted from Crestview Holdings. The color drained from his face so fast he actually stumbled back against the counter, dropping the pen. How did you—" "I'm a compliance analyst, Marcus," I said softly. "It took me 3 hours to find what took you 4 years to hide." He collapsed into a dining chair, burying his face in his hands. For the first time in years, the arrogant, stressed facade cracked open, and he began to sob quietly. "You don't understand, Sarah. Clara, if they take that money, she has nowhere to go. They will put her in a state facility. I couldn't let them take it." "I know about Clara," I said, my voice remaining completely steady. "I've read her medical records. I know why you did it." He looked up, a sudden ray of desperate hope in his eyes. "Then you understand? You see why I had to hide it?" "I understand your motivation, Marcus," I replied cold-headedly. But what you fail to understand is that you had no right to make me pay for your noble crusade without my consent. You drained my savings. You let me suffer. You lied to my face every single day while I worked 7 days a week to feed us. I slid the private settlement document across the table. Here is what happens now, I said. You will not file that fraudulent hardship form. You will execute a full, non-contested legal separation agreement today. Under the terms of the settlement, Marcus was forced to liquidate his secondary domestic holdings and assign 100% of his equity in his architectural firm's IP to an independent trust. Out of the offshore funds, my attorney secured an immediate cash settlement of $850,000 for me, representing my full share of hidden marital assets, full reimbursement of my drained personal savings, and compensatory damages for financial fraud. Because I chose not to file a criminal complaint with the Department of Justice, Marcus avoided federal prosecution for tax evasion and wire fraud. However, to satisfy internal banking compliance mandates regarding the flagged routing details, my firm filed a confidential suspicious activity report, SAR, triggering an IRS civil audit of his firm. The remaining offshore capital, roughly $1.2 million, was legally restructured into an irrevocable, court-supervised medical trust strictly dedicated to Clara's lifetime care, removing Marcus entirely as the trustee and placing an independent corporate fiduciary in charge. Marcus survived financially, but barely. His business reputation was severely damaged by the civil audit penalties, forcing him to downsize his firm to a single-person consultancy. He lives in a tiny rented apartment in downtown Columbus, working long hours to maintain his court-ordered contributions to Clara's trust. We were divorced 6 months later. There was no shouting match, no dramatic court battle, and no tearful reconciliation, just a quiet signing of papers in a neutral conference room. Clara remains well cared for in her facility, totally unaware of the silent war that was fought over her protection. Marcus tries to call me occasionally, leaving quiet, repentant voicemails asking if we can ever sit down for coffee to talk through what happened. I never answer them. Justice isn't always about destroying your enemy completely. Sometimes it's simply about extracting the truth, protecting the innocent, and walking away with what is rightfully yours while leaving the liar to live with the quiet weight of their choices. When a person chooses to do the wrong thing for what they believe is the right reason, does the noble end ever truly justify the destructive means? Let me know in the comments where you're watching from tonight. And if stories like this one matter to you, make sure you're subscribed to Justice Unfolds, because every story here has a reckoning.